Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for coming. Today's plenary voting session marked a very important milestone. We have adopted the last Fit for 55 files led by the Environment Committee. We are here to take stock of this successful result with President of the European Parliament, Mrs. Roberta METSOLA, and the rapporteurs of the key files that were adopted today. We will have some introductory remarks. Following that, we'll be able to take questions from the room, and for those of you who are connected remotely, interpretation is provided in and from English, French, German, Dutch, Spanish, and Italian. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to President Metsola.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pop. Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. As we've just heard, the House today just voted on key pieces of legislation that are part of the Fit for 55 package. Our plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. We can all be proud. Today's vote was really historic. So first, let me start by thanking the rapporteurs, Peter Liese, Mohammed CHAHIM, Esther de LANGE and David Casa, the chairman of the lead committees, Pascal Canfin and Dragos Pislaru, as well as all the administrators and advisors who have really worked tirelessly to find an agreement on these key pieces of legislative files. We can say Europe leads the green revolution, and we will be the world's first climate-neutral continent. And the deals on the reform of the emissions trading system, the carbon border adjustment mechanism and the social climate fund are all central and complementary in keeping the European Green Deal on track. These laws will put a price on the carbon we produce, and it means that the most polluting industries will have to increase their emission reduction targets. It will also put a price for non-EU producers, providing a level playing field so that we will not leave our industry at a disadvantage vis-à-vis their external competitors. They will also need to pay for their emissions if their products are to be sold in Europe. And with the help of the Social Climate Fund, amounting to an estimated total of 86.7 billion euros, this will ensure that the climate transition leaves no one behind. We have to make this transition together. So today we can say we deliver on our promises. The Parliament's strong ambition in the negotiations have led to an outcome that is good for Europe and that is good for its citizens, for the planet and for our next generations. I will shortly give the word to all the rapporteurs to elaborate on the individual pieces of legislation, but if I can zoom out and make three very short points from a macro perspective. First of all, this is about climate and a lot about energy. These regulatory tools are as much as about our collective security as it is about the green transition. They will make us more efficient and independent regarding our energy sources. The more incentives we create for our industries to go green, the more independent we will be from fossil fuels imported from outside of the EU. Second, this is not about going green for the sake of being green. Our Green Deal must be a growth strategy. There is no conflict between the economy and the environment. We cannot have one without the other. Instead, this is about opportunity. The green transition will create new jobs and give us a competitive edge in new sectors and in all industries. And this means that with the green, we are actually returning to economic growth, bringing our energy bills under control, pushing back against inflation. Third, people will need to believe that going green will pay off for them, for their businesses and for their families. So for the Green Deal to fly, we need to ensure that our populations buy into it. So today we are putting in place a regulatory framework that will incentivize a positive transformation of Europe. The solutions will also set standards for other partners around the world to follow. And this is ultimately what it means for Europe to be a leader. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to Roberta. The result of today is good for climate, good for the jobs, especially in the energy-intensive industry, and good for the people. We are delivering to our promises, but we do it in the most cost-efficient way. The ETS rewards everybody that saves CO2, and we are not here in Brussels, Strasbourg, or in the national capitals to say what is the best way. The market and the citizens will find the best way. And I think that's the first important point. Second point is, and this is really a revolution, since we have the ETS, since we started to discuss it more than 20 years ago, the Parliament wanted the money to be spent on purpose. And we never succeeded. Member States were always against. It was always a should in the legislation, should be spent on purpose. And many member states spent less than 50%. Now it's a shell. So I would estimate that if you put ETS 1 and ETS 2 together, in the next years we will have around 700 billion euros. And they are not allowed to spend it for anything they like, but on purpose for this transition, for the transition for modern technologies. And in the ETS 2, Esther and David assured that also the social aspect must be really respected. So member states, even that spent the money on purpose, the one I know best, Germany, needs to change, because much of the money that we have now goes to relatively high-income people, because they can afford a heat pump or electric vehicle. The social aspect must be much more respected. And when people say the Social Climate Fund may be not enough to address this challenge, it is huge. It is more than 68 billion. We increased it compared to the Council. But the national revenues only in ETS 2 are about twice as much. And they also have to be spent on purpose. I think that's a very, very important point. I'm very grateful for the big support in plenary, but also for the big support in society, NGOs, climate science, and also big parts of the business sector now support the compromise, and this is really something we all together can be proud of. Let me say a few words in my mother tongue. I will speak German for 1 minute.
I would like to direct my remarks to the German public once again. I know that Phoenix is broadcasting this press conference live, and so I want perhaps get involved in the German debate. Now, we were united today in a way that we were perhaps not when it came to the debate on combustion engines. And I, for one, am extremely proud that we, as a political group, the EPP, stood united with the exception of 2 members. And I know that ahead of this, there was an awful lot of controversy and debate, but I'm delighted that when it came to the vote, we came together. ETS 2, including road transport and construction, was actually an idea from German scientists and academics who have accompanied this whole process. And we've tried to bring as many people along with us as we could. And I am delighted that the German Climate Ministry, headed up by Sven Giegold, as well as many members of my own party in the CDU, climate policy has not always been popular, but certainly my own party leader and bureau have realized just how important it is. So we have had huge obstacles along the way, and I'm delighted that at the end of the day we got the Social Climate Fund through. I know that a number of colleagues from certain countries, I'm sorry to say, were unable to go along with that, but we have to show solidarity with one another. We have to spend money in Central and Eastern Europe, and that is why I'm delighted that my own party, as well as the Liberals in Germany, who were not initially on board, were convinced. And I think that we all realise that without solidarity there can be no European progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First of all, we should discuss speaking time allocation here. I never would have thought that I would share the podium with this many EPP members, but we work very well together. Let me say that, let's say more than a year ago, we had this, let's say, I think when we were more than a year ago thinking about how to deal with these files, especially in the Strasbourg session where we, let's say, did not find an agreement, we would not have hoped to have the results that were shown today. And we have this saying in Dutch, I do not know whether, it's always hard to translate sayings, but let me try. I think this one is okay. You know, sometimes you need friction for things to shine. And I think this was a good example of that. We had some friction between us, but at the end, I think the joint effort and also understanding each other's position played a very important role in shaping, I think, the compromises that we've agreed upon in December and that we voted today. And I think the Parliament played a very significant role in, you know, taking care of all the different, let's say, issues or insecurities or, and at the end, I think the compromise has tried to deal with all the different elements where there was some, let's say, trouble where there was trouble for some political groups. I mean, I think now when I look at the Social Climate Fund and the ETS 2, I think I'm very confident that we have enough social safeguards. When it comes to CBAM, I'm very happy that I think the ambition is higher than than the Council wanted. I think we had an agreement there where we tried to extend the scope such that this very important element, this very important, I think, historic mechanism is introduced with the right sectoral scope, covering both direct and indirect emissions, having some exemptions for indirect emissions. But all in all, I believe that the result that we presented in December and that we voted on yesterday gives a strong signal to the rest of the world. And I think the signal is very clear. You're welcome to sell your products in the EU, but if you do not follow our ambition when it comes to decarbonization and keeping your economy competitive, then you pay a tariff at the border. Those are my first comments.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. From my side, I'd like to take a step back as to why these proposals belong together. I think the President has quite rightly said that they are complementary, and I think the fact that we dealt with them together is one of the components that explains their success today. And I think the Social Climate Fund, if you understand where it comes from, really underlines that. If you want to reduce CO2 emissions, and that we want to do. We want to take the lead and we want to deliver for our generation, but in particular for the next generations to come. If you want to do that, the best instrument to use is the ETS system. It has a proven track record in terms of delivering the targets that we set ourselves. Because you work via the market and because you give industry an incentive to improve and to produce less CO2. It works better than just asking member states to please reduce CO2. So in that sense, if you want to deliver on the CO2 reduction, you also need ETS in the buildings and in the transport sector. And indeed, Peter, this was initially a German idea. If you had asked me in the beginning, will this fly all the way to the end? 3 years ago, I would have been skeptical, but it did. And it did because we convinced people that if you want to deliver results, you also need results in the area of transport and in the area of the built environment. Look at my member state. It's a tiny country, the Netherlands. Lots of Germans drive through it in cars that emit CO2. If we don't have European-wide agreement, our objective would be so high and so impossible to achieve, if we did not bring both the buildings and the transport sector in. So if you want to do that, you need ETS. But if you do have ETS in these two sectors, you know it will have an impact on people, and in particular on the most vulnerable households. And that is why you need the Social Climate Fund. And the Social Climate Fund, if member states use it correctly, it can cushion the full impact of ETS2 for the lowest income groups. I think that is very important. Does that solve the entire problem? No, because ETS2, the entire Fit for 55 proposals were made before the war in Ukraine and before the rising energy prices. And therefore, we had to adapt as a negotiating team during the negotiations to not only make sure that the impact of a potential new ETS was cushioned, but that we also address the wider impact of high energy prices. And we've done that by including safeguards in the legislation on ETS to say if the energy prices remain as high as they were at the time of the war, ETS2 will not be introduced yet. We will wait a bit longer. Another safeguard is to limit the maximum price of ETS2 and therefore the impact on households. And of course, the Social Climate Fund is another way of cushioning that impact. Just to set the record straight, because there's a lot of figures going around, there was a hard fight with the Council to get some national co-financing, as was also initially proposed by the European Commission, into this fund. Council's position was that they wanted no national co-financing. We were not surprised because member states always want maximum flexibility, also not to spend their revenues from ETS on purpose. But we managed to bring back 25% co-financing, which leads to, for the full period, a fund of 86.7 billion. And let me leave it at that, because, David, I think there should also, for my co-rapporteur, be something left to say about this fund. I will finish with, indeed, Peter Liese's achievement in the ETS1 to change the wording about the national revenue from should to shall. It might seem small, it might seem trivial. It was for sure 3 or 4 years of our lives, but it is fundamental in the sense that the hundreds of billions of revenue generated by the ETS system. Let's not forget the last time around that I was working on the reform of ETS, the ETS price was €5 per tonne. It is now 100, so that explains the additional income for member states. And this shall has ensured that it shall also be spent on purpose rather than giving a blank cheque, which we as a parliament were not willing to do. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Casa, please.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, on the Social Climate Fund, of course, I welcome the excellent results of the votes. I think it shows very clearly that the negotiated deal is a good balance and that the compromises reached have broad support. We have a fund that will be much better equipped to fulfill its objectives, a fund that is a good size and that I think can have a real concrete and positive impact. As the co-rapporteur from the EMPL committee, my focus has always been, of course, on the social dimension. We wanted to ensure that funds will reach those who need them most, and we wanted to promote long-term solutions over short-term fixes. I think that Parliament has succeeded in this regard. There rightly is a lot of focus on the size of the fund, which is a total mobilization of 86.7 billion, and this is more than we were expecting, to be honest. But we have also managed to include safeguards on how the funds are targeted. We have included robust consultation requirements. We have also increased obligations on the member states to better plan and target funding, and we have created safeguards on the use of direct income support. It is my hope that this fund will address and leave citizens better equipped to become more energy efficient, to be less dependent on energy generated by fossil fuels, and trigger a push to effectively address energy and transport poverty. We have seen the problems that arise because of our dependence on fossil fuels, not only to the environment, but also to prices for consumers when supplies are disturbed. The transition toward greater energy efficiency will help citizens manage their energy costs, as well as reduce emissions and thereby help us to reach our climate targets. The Parliament had some important priorities in these negotiations. As for the most part, we were successful, I believe. As Esther was saying, we have secured a national co-financing rate of 25%. We have made sure that the funds will be available at least a year before the ETS 2, so that there will be time for the necessary investments. We have kept direct income support at 37.5% of the fund. We strengthened the role of stakeholders, and we have improved definitions that will ensure the funds go to those that really need them. To secure our future, we must reduce emissions, and I echo what President Roberta METSOLA was saying. We must do this in a way that is socially just, where it is not those who earn the least that pay the higher price, where our citizens are supported on the road to reach our climate targets. The fund we negotiated will play an important role in reaching these targets. I will take this last opportunity, Madam, to say once again thank you to those who worked on this package, in particular my co-rapporteur Esther de Lange, Peter, Mohammed and Suchana, who is not with us here today, for their exceptional work, but also all the shadows and all the staff coming from our secretariats and our offices. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are able now to take a few questions. We're going to try to group them together so that we give most of you the opportunity. And please introduce yourself. Also indicate the media that you represent, and if possible, indicate to whom you're addressing the question. Otherwise, we will try to do a little. So I will take a little batch of 3 questions, please. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you, David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. A couple of questions. I don't know who can answer. The first one is on ETS 2 and the social fund, because the social fund will go for the most vulnerable household. But today the middle class has a problem with inflation, with high energy prices, and cannot afford an electric vehicle, heat pump, and so on. I cannot, but I'm not a vulnerable people. So I'm wondering if this measure will widening inequalities in the European Union because the rich will pay less than the middle class. Second question is more political. In 1 year there will be elections, and some national political parties in the center-right, right and far-right are saying we will backtrack. There will be a new majority in the Parliament and in the Commission, and we will backtrack on this. What's your comment? Thank you.
Lorenzo, please, if you'd like the second question.
Consoli from Asca News, Italy. It's also on the social fund, my question, and it's a sort of follow-up. Is there any benchmark, threshold, or any number, any scale that you can give us about the people in the families, in the households that will get the money from the social fund and when, and also the small enterprises that will be helped by this social fund? Because we say the most vulnerable ones, it is clear, but we don't know which ones are the most vulnerable ones that are identified by this measure. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Emanuela, you wanted, please?
Can you hear me? Okay, Emanuela Barbiroglio from Carbon Pulse. So I have a question because many claim that these new laws rely too much on member states. So what do you expect exactly member states to do? And the other question is, do you think that EU industries, in particular chemical and petrochemicals, will have to move outside of the EU? And how is the EU going to compete against the US or carrot approach? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Metsola, if you would like to reply to any of the more general questions, otherwise the rapporteurs for the Climate Fund and then Mr. Liese.
Well, I can, excuse me, so on the details and the numbers, I think that my colleagues can answer, and I can also, perhaps for the general political questions, are we relying too much on member states or not? If anything, what this Parliament wanted with this package, and you will see it also with a very, very broad cross-party political majority, is first of all to make sure that the member states' obligations are actually implemented. Esther at one point said, we need to make sure that member states stick to their obligations, and that's what we have, as a Parliament, been insisting on in terms of every single piece of legislation that comes into play. Why do we say this? Because, of course, we can have great votes like we have today. We can have regulation one directive and 2 regulations that come into force, but then further down the line we realise that some member states are not doing what they're supposed to do. So this is the reason also while negotiating, especially the carbon border and adjustment mechanisms from Mohammed's file, is that we made sure that there is more regulation and decision-making in terms of control of the implementation at Commission level, at EU level. We wanted this to make sure that the funds are spent appropriately. And on that, I would say that I do not see any risk of backtracking. I would see this Parliament as being ambitious, visionary, courageous, and one that, if I proudly can say I'm sharing a stage with such courageous and visionary and ambitious colleagues, are those that will take even more, I would say, difficult legislative proposals that are coming our way and finding a solution going forward. By finding solutions, I mean sitting with the Council, with Commission proposals that we will need to match with ongoing scenarios that are constantly changing. And yes, some governments that are at some points or other increasingly reluctant to implement them. But we are here elected by our citizens. We were given among the very top of our mandate and priority the responsibility to deliver on our climate ambitions while making sure that no one is left behind. And I think that that's what can be the legacy of this Parliament.
Please.
Yeah, I will start with the last question on industry, because that was really a big issue in the ETS report. Industry was rather negative when the Commission came out with the proposal. And we worked a lot. We talked a lot also with not only the entrepreneurs, but also the representatives of workers, the trade unions. And now the big part of the industry supports the compromise. I have a personal contact to the CEO of the biggest steel plant in Europe, and he said it is a good compromise. We changed the text. We give breathing space for industry in these difficult times when they are challenged anyhow with the supply chain, with replacing Russian gas and so on. But we keep the ambition and we make it even higher in 2030. That was one important element, and we changed the text in a way that industry is now convinced they can survive. Of course, only if you see the way to climate neutrality. So if you decide to continue to produce as you did the last 30 years, that will not fly. But the customers also ask for carbon neutral products now. So the manufacturer of cars, washing machines and other stuff, they ask for the carbon neutral steel now. So the market works in two ways, with the ETS and with the customers. And that's why I'm quite sure if European industry goes this way and we support them by the Innovation Fund and by the national revenues, then it will be a competitive advantage. On the backtracking, no, I don't think so, but we have to fight. We have to fight for our future generation, for our conviction. And then I'm optimistic. Also in the Council, 23 members voted in favor, 2 abstained, 2 didn't make up their mind. Maybe two member states vote against, but to change that back, I don't think it will be easy for the far right. And as I said, EPP, all delegations voted in favor. Only 2 colleagues, 1 Hungarian, 1 Romanian, voted against. This is a strong signal also for the future that we stand behind this. Last but not least, the middle class. It's really an important point. And whenever I have more than 5 minutes, I mention that. When we speak about people in need, we don't speak only about the unemployed or the people with a very low pension. We speak of hardworking people that normally go along, but they are now challenged. And they should also be addressed by this instrument. And here, member states have a responsibility. They have a legal obligation to put social aspects into account. And social doesn't mean only the 20% poorest, but also those that are among those 50% low income. And this is also, when I speak about Germany, they spend the money on purpose, but they didn't take these social aspects into account. From the German revenues, people that are quite rich and can buy an electric car or a heat pump get more money than those that cannot. And also this has to change. We need to enable also low-income people that are not among the 20% lowest, but the low middle class. This is the most important point.
Would you like to add a little?
Yes, from the Social Climate Fund negotiations, maybe on this middle class and how do you target the spending, because that was a large part of our discussions and it lasted all the way until the final weekend. So it was open until the final deal was reached. And middle class was a key issue. There were some political groups who wanted to leave out the middle class and only focus on the absolute lowest income groups. However, if you look at energy poverty and at transport poverty, which in particular in rural areas is an issue, you find that often member states already have measures in place for the lowest income groups, as a result of which the groups slightly above that are actually at a higher risk of transport and energy poverty because nothing is in place for them. And therefore, for the EPP, it was of key importance to include the middle class, and we have succeeded in doing that. The way we found the solution to address this problem, where maybe I, as a person, was a bit too ambitious. My first job was working for the Dutch ANWB, so that's the German ADAC let's say. So I know a thing or two about cars, and I even wanted to be so prescriptive to say, okay, if it's a higher category car than category C, for example, a rental car, Europe doesn't pay. I don't see why Europe should pay for your Tesla if you can afford it. Even a small European contribution makes no sense. This is not the people we would like to help. That idea didn't fly, but what we found as a solution in the end was to say we link the targeting of the spending to transport and energy poverty, which in a lot of member states also include middle-class households, or particular middle-class households at the moment. Then we ran into the trouble, of course, that there are slightly different definitions at national level for what exactly energy and transport poverty is, but we looked into them and they are rather comparable. So by linking the spending to transport and energy poverty, and so thank you for asking the question, this was really one of my key things, also linking the reporting of member states to these two issues, we force member states to target the money there. So I don't only want to define in this law, it should go to people at risk of transport and energy poverty. I want member states to report how their measures have contributed to either lowering transport and energy poverty, or at least decreasing the trend that we unfortunately see at the moment. It was one of my key things, so thank you for asking that question. Maybe if I'm allowed, one point on the petrochemical industry, or whatever industry, it was the final question, are you not worried that it will leave Europe? Coming from a country that also has a petrochemical industry, the first signal, which is what Peter also referred to, I think, is that individual sectors in individual member states say, please do this at national level, at European level, because if this is done at national level in 27 different ways, this is the best way to ruin industry in Europe. So please do this at European level, which is what we did. However, and this is why I said in the debate, the work is only beginning. For us as EPP, we always said that climate policy and industrial policy need to go hand in hand. And therefore, only this package in itself, in a way, is not enough, if I can say so. If the Green Deal doesn't deliver jobs in Europe, I told the Commissioner responsible, the Green Deal will not work. And therefore, we need an industrial policy that makes sure that there is interconnections between member states in the field of energy, that pipelines go into the ground for clean hydrogen, that planning procedures are sped up because it takes way too long to give industry the infrastructure that they need to make the transition. And I'm happy to say that since the Inflation Reduction Act, in the USA, this point that initially we were rather alone on as EPP now has brought support. And there are proposals now from the Commission, as you know, the Net Zero Industry Act, for example, critical raw materials, that looks into all these elements that I think our industry quite rightly demands. So we can make sure they stay. This package will help. But we need a very strategic industrial policy as well, and we're currently working on that. Thank you. Okay.
One very quick word on the Social Climate Fund, and then a quick word on CBAM.
Yes,
and then
just to agree, first of all, with what Esther was saying, but on how the funds will be targeted and to who, this will depend also, of course, on the social climate plans, but also within the parameters of the definitions we created. So yes, the fund will go to those who are vulnerable, but the definitions do not leave some room, do leave, in fact, some room for maneuver, as you rightly pointed out. But the member states can, however, have to create their plans that will then need to be approved by the Commission. So funds will go to those who need them most, but also where they can be most effective. I think this will answer your question.
Clearly, I'm the S&D minority on the stage, so I have to wait for my time. But anyway, thank you. No, but listen, I think there were a lot of concerns when it comes to ETS, CBAM, and the Social Climate Fund. I think today's vote proves that we addressed most of the concerns. And you cannot solve everything in one piece of legislation. As Esther clearly said, also the Net Zero Industry Act will help decarbonize our industry. When it comes to the chemical industry, I'm going to be very bold. If you want to keep those heavy energy-intensive sectors in the EU, you need a CBAM. I've been talking to many. The funny thing is, when you talk to in the same sector with different chemical companies, I was supported by many of them, but there were also quite some opposition against CBAM coming from the same sector. I was talking to some of the, let's say, the greater opposition producers after we had an agreement and after the energy crisis occurred, and they acknowledged that maybe we should have reassessed our position because we are getting more and more aware that we need a CBAM. If we start investing severely in decarbonization and we keep this unlevel playing field, unfair competition coming from outside of the EU, you're basically demotivating any investor to decarbonize. And I can tell you one other thing. We will not be the only region that will introduce a CBAM. CBAM will be normal in a couple of years because if the Americans invest billions to help decarbonize their sectors, then you need to have something to create a level playing field. And the Americans then choose America first. We don't choose those type of protectionism mechanisms. But if you want to keep a level playing field, you need these type of mechanisms. And I know the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Canadians are also thinking about it. Even the Indians are talking about it. This is the future for climate change and keeping the industrial competitiveness. Thank you.
Fortunately, we don't have time for any more questions due to the tight schedule. Please, if there are a couple of more questions and if the rapporteurs themselves might want to spare a couple of minutes in the room, I invite you to do so. Otherwise, thank you very much for your presence today. Thank you very much.